The Witch King of Angmar, Sauron's most loyal and powerful servant, is one of the most feared beings in Middle-earth. But what would happen if the Dark Lord himself fell? Could the Witch King gather and wield Sauron's power? This intriguing question has long fascinated fans of J.R.R. Tolkien's world, and it opens up a realm of possibilities about the true potential of the Nazgul's leader. In this video, we will explore the relationship between the Witch King and Sauron, the nature of their power, and whether the Witch King could rise to become the next Dark Lord. The Witch King of Angmar is one of the most enigmatic and terrifying figures in Tolkien's legendarium, yet his origins remain shrouded in mystery. Before becoming the leader of the Nazgul, he was once a mortal king, a man of great power and ambition. Like the other ring wraiths, he was seduced by the promise of power and immortality through one of the 9 rings of power given to men by Sauron. These rings, imbued with the dark magic of Sauron himself, gradually enslaved their bearers, corrupting them into wraiths that served their masters' every command. The exact identity of the Witch King before his fall is never revealed, but it is suggested that he was a powerful sorcerer or warrior king, skilled in the dark arts and already predisposed to a lust for power. This would explain why he rose above the other Nazgul to become their leader, taking on the title of Witch King and establishing his kingdom in Angmar. From his fortress in Khand Dûm, he waged a relentless war against the northern kingdoms of Arnor, showing strategic brilliance and a ruthless drive to conquer all who opposed him. His command over dark magic grew as he wielded his ring, and it's said that the Witch King possessed abilities that even surpassed the other Nazgul, such as summoning storms, spreading fear, and wielding a Morgul blade that could infect and enslave the souls of his enemies. As Sauron's chief lieutenant, he was entrusted with leading Sauron's armies and carrying out his master's will across Middle-earth. But how much of his power was his own, and how much was a direct result of Sauron's influence over him? The Witch King's power was tied closely to Sauron's. Without the Dark Lord, his strength would never have reached such heights. However, over the centuries, the Witch King gained mastery over dark sorcery and warfare, making him one of the most formidable forces in Middle-earth. His transformation from a mortal king to a shadow of terror was complete, and he became an instrument of destruction. The very sight of him instilled fear in even the bravest of men, and his presence on the battlefield often turned the tide of war. Yet despite his terrifying abilities, there remained an undeniable dependence on Sauron's will and power. Without Sauron, he was still a powerful sorcerer, but lacked the autonomy to become a Dark Lord in his own right. The bond between Sauron and the Witch King is central to understanding the true extent of the Witch King's power. Sauron did not merely control the Witch King through orders or commands. The Witch King's very existence was an extension of Sauron's will. When Sauron forged the One Ring, he poured much of his own power into it, and it became the key to controlling the other rings of power, including the 9 rings given to men. This meant that the Witch King and the other Nazgul were forever bound to Sauron's fate, tethered to his power and his will. The Witch King, therefore, was not just a servant, he was a manifestation of Sauron's influence in the physical world. When the One Ring was lost, the Nazgul faded into shadow, only to return when Sauron's power began to rise again. This connection demonstrates that while the Witch King possessed great power, much of it was due to his bond with Sauron. The Witch King's strength grew in proportion to Sauron's resurgence, and as Sauron's power spread, the Witch King became bolder, more fearsome, and seemingly unstoppable. However, this bond also served as a limitation. The Witch King could not fully break free or act entirely independently of Sauron's will. His purpose was to serve, to execute Sauron's plans, and to lead Sauron's armies. Despite his own cunning, intelligence, and mastery over dark magic, he was always subservient to Sauron's greater designs. The Witch King's own identity was consumed by the darkness of Sauron's influence, and he operated more as a vessel for Sauron's power than an independent agent. This raises the question, Could the Witch King have gathered Sauron's power if the Dark Lord fell? While the Witch King was undoubtedly the most powerful of the Nazgul, it's uncertain if he could maintain his strength without the force that originally granted it to him. Unlike other Dark Lords in Middle-earth's history who rose to power through their own means, the Witch King was created, molded, and shaped by Sauron's will. Without Sauron's presence, he might have retained some of his sorcery and combat prowess, but he would have lacked the unifying force that made him a truly formidable enemy. To understand the Witch King's potential to gather Sauron's power, we must first examine the nature of Sauron's power itself. Sauron was no ordinary being. He was a Maya, an immortal spirit of immense power who served Morgoth, the original Dark Lord, in the First Age. After Morgoth's defeat, Sauron chose to continue his master's work, turning his attention to Middle-earth and using his cunning, intelligence, and innate magical abilities to establish himself as a new Dark Lord. Unlike many of the other beings in Middle-earth, Sauron's power was not derived from external sources, but from his own spirit, knowledge, and mastery over dark magic. Sauron's ability to shape his power into tangible forms is one of the most significant aspects of his might. This culminated in the creation of the One Ring, an object that amplified his abilities and allowed him to control the other rings of power and their bearers. The One Ring was a part of Sauron himself, containing a significant portion of his essence and power. Through it, he could dominate others, extend his influence, and maintain control over vast armies and territories. Sauron's power wasn't merely magical, it was also psychological and political. He was a master manipulator, capable of corrupting even the purest souls with promises of power, wealth, or immortality. His influence was pervasive, seeping into the hearts and minds of individuals, bending them to his will. It is this combination of raw magical might, cunning intelligence, and psychological manipulation that made Sauron such a terrifying force. Without the One Ring, Sauron's power was greatly diminished, but not entirely destroyed. Even in his weakened state, he could still control his servants and direct his plans from the shadows. However, the One Ring represented the pinnacle of his power, and its destruction would mean the end of Sauron's ability to directly influence the world. The Witch King's power, by comparison, was not self-generated. He did not possess the inherent strength of a Maya or the ability to create objects of power like the One Ring. Instead, his abilities were an extension of Sauron's will and magic. The Witch King's greatest feats, his ability to inspire terror, summon storms, and command vast armies, were all fueled by the link he shared with Sauron and the influence of the One Ring. If Sauron were to fall and the One Ring destroyed, the Witch King would be left without the source that amplified his own power. This inherent difference between Sauron and the Witch King means that while the latter was a powerful and fearsome servant, he lacked the depth of power and independence to gather and wield Sauron's full might. The Witch King's power, though immense in its own right, was always derivative, never truly his own. The potential of the Witch King was undeniably immense, but it's crucial to understand the limits that constrained him throughout his existence. Despite being the most powerful of the Nazgul, the Witch King's abilities were fundamentally tied to Sauron's will and influence, which means that his power was always subject to certain restrictions. These limitations raise questions about how much he could achieve on his own, and whether he could ever transcend his role as Sauron's chief servant to become an independent Dark Lord. One of the most significant limitations of the Witch King was his dependence on the power of the One Ring. As one of the 9 ring-wraiths, his power was bound to the 9 rings of power given to men, which in turn were subjugated by the One Ring. This meant that his strength and influence waxed and waned with the fate of the One Ring itself. When Sauron was at the height of his power and the One Ring was active, the Witch King's abilities were enhanced, allowing him to perform feats that would be impossible for ordinary mortals. He could inspire terror in his enemies, wield powerful dark magic, and command vast armies with unmatched authority. However, when Sauron lost the One Ring, the Witch King and the other Nazgul faded into shadows, becoming mere wraiths until Sauron's power began to recover. This dependence on the One Ring and Sauron's existence fundamentally limited the Witch King's potential for independent action. His power was not self-sustaining, it was always tied to the fate of his master. Even though he could perform great feats of sorcery, such as summoning storms or causing dread in his enemies, these abilities were granted to him by the dark magic that Sauron controlled. The Witch King never demonstrated the ability to wield power that originated from himself alone. This reliance on an external source made him vulnerable to any shifts in Sauron's strength or the existence of the One Ring. Another critical limitation was the prophecy that foretold the Witch King's demise. As recounted by Glorfindel during the Battle of Fornost in the Third Age, it was declared that, "Not by the hand of man shall he fall." This prophecy seemed to grant the Witch King a sense of invulnerability, and it certainly made him more fearless and arrogant in battle. However, this very prophecy was a double-edged sword. It revealed that there was an inherent vulnerability within the Witch King's existence, suggesting that forces beyond his comprehension could bring about his end. The prophecy was fulfilled when Éowyn, a woman of Rohan, and Merry, a hobbit, combined their efforts to defeat him on the fields of Pelennor. This demonstrated that despite his immense power, the Witch King was not invincible. He had inherent weaknesses that could be exploited. Moreover, the Witch King's identity was shaped and dominated by fear, both as a weapon and as a limitation. He was undoubtedly a master of terror, capable of breaking the spirit of his enemies with his mere presence. However, this reliance on fear as a tool meant that he was less effective against those who could overcome it. In encounters with characters who were brave or protected by powerful magic, such as Gandalf, Aragorn, or Glorfindel, the Witch King's power was less effective. His inability to instill fear in these individuals highlighted a significant constraint on his abilities. As a being who thrived on darkness and dread, the Witch King was always less potent in the face of courage and light. The Witch King's position as a servant also meant that he lacked the strategic and visionary capabilities required to truly rise as a Dark Lord. While he was an excellent military commander and an accomplished sorcerer, his actions were always directed by Sauron's will. He lacked the autonomy to devise grand schemes of his own, and there's little evidence to suggest that he possessed the same level of cunning, intelligence, or ambition that defined Sauron's mastery over Middle-earth. Without Sauron's guiding hand, the Witch King might have struggled to maintain his power, let alone expand it. Could the Witch King have ever gathered Sauron's power and become the next Dark Lord? This question requires us to delve deep into the nature of power in Middle-earth and the specific requirements for one to rise to such a position. To become a Dark Lord, an individual needs more than just raw strength or military might. They need to possess a unique combination of magical prowess, cunning intelligence, strategic vision, and the ability to bend others to their will. Sauron possessed all these qualities, allowing him to dominate vast armies and control the wills of others through the One Ring. The Witch King, while powerful, did not display the same level of independence or creativity needed to ascend to this role. If Sauron had fallen and the Witch King survived, he would have faced numerous challenges in trying to gather and wield his master's power. The first and most pressing issue would be the lack of the One Ring, the central source of Sauron's power and control. Without the One Ring, the Witch King would not have the means to exert influence over the other Nazgul, the orcs, trolls, and various dark creatures that served Sauron. He might retain command over some of these forces, but they would be far less organized and effective without the unifying influence of the One Ring. Furthermore, the Witch King lacked the ability to create and forge new instruments of power. Sauron's greatest achievement was the crafting of the One Ring, an artifact that allowed him to bend the will of others to his own. The Witch King, however, was not a smith, nor did he possess the knowledge of crafting such powerful objects. This inability to create new sources of power would have severely limited his potential to rise as a new Dark Lord. Another challenge the Witch King would face is the lack of support and loyalty from other dark forces. Sauron's influence over Middle-earth extended far beyond his direct servants. He manipulated various factions through fear, deception, and promises of power. The Witch King, despite his terrifying presence, did not possess the same level of charisma or influence. He would likely struggle to gain the loyalty of independent Dark Lords, sorcerers, or even lesser orc chieftains, who might have seen Sauron's downfall as an opportunity to assert their own dominance. Moreover, the Witch King's abilities were not geared toward the subtlety and manipulation required to maintain an empire of evil. Sauron was a master manipulator, able to weave complex plots that ensnared others in his web of deceit. The Witch King, by contrast, was a blunt instrument of terror and destruction. He was at his most effective on the battlefield, where his overwhelming presence and power could be brought to bear directly against his enemies. However, ruling over a dark empire requires more than brute strength. It requires the ability to manipulate, deceive, and control others over long periods. Lastly, the destruction of the Witch King at the hands of Eowyn and Merry demonstrated that his power was not absolute. He could be defeated, and this would make it difficult for him to establish the same level of fear and authority that Sauron commanded. Even if he had managed to survive Sauron's fall, his reputation as a defeated leader would have undermined any attempt to gather Sauron's former power and followers under his own banner. Ultimately, while the Witch King was the most powerful of the Nazgul and one of the most fearsome beings in Middle-earth, he lacked the qualities necessary to gather Sauron's power and become the next Dark Lord. He was always a servant, a manifestation of Sauron's will rather than a truly independent force. His power was derivative, and without Sauron's guidance, he would have struggled to maintain control over the forces of darkness. The Witch King's potential was immense, but his reliance on his master's power, the limitations imposed by his existence as a ringwraith, and his lack of the strategic vision and cunning needed to rule made it unlikely that he could ever rise to take Sauron's place.